Good morning. Thank you so much for coming again. A lot of us were here yesterday for internal discussions, and I'm very happy that we can open up the discussions to a wider public. This symposium called Transcultural, Transdisciplinary Practices, Arts and Sciences in a Changing World is a result of a lot of discussions between Ravi Agarwal, who's sitting over there, artist, writer and curator, and myself, Damian Christinger. And this resulted in our wish to bring together these diverse practices for a two-day symposium on how these collaborations that everybody is talking about could take future forms. I mean, it's quite interesting if you have been in the art world for a while, as most of us have. The change has been quite astonishing. Now, if you go to any museum in the world, there will be a show on the Anthropocene or climate change. There's a lot of talk and symposiums like ours on science and arts. And the reason for that is quite clear. We don't need to get into it. The thing is this, as suddenly everybody is jumping onto this train and wanting to facilitate change through these collaborations, we need to stop sometime and ask ourselves questions. And this is what we will try to do today. But I'm very happy to welcome Ravi Palke, the director of the Science Gallery in Bangalore, for a first input. She will present this new project that, in Ravi, in my opinion, is one of the leading ideas worldwide of how to facilitate these ideas and collaborations in an institution. She's a historian of science, I believe, originally, and now the director of this brand new science gallery in Bengaluru. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Okay. Am I audible? It's working? Okay, excellent. So, in the first instance, thank you very much, Damian and Ravi. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to present the project to a group of people who are interested in what's at stake. And as much as I travel and speak about my work, I just realized this morning that this is the first time I present the project outside of India in its fullness. So please bear with me as I share with you today what it is that I'm trying to do in Bangalore with a wonderful team of people. And I would love to have your feedback in the form of questions or even afterwards in order to take this idea even further. So let me start with a few notes. There's a presentation, of course, but let me start with a few notes as to why I'm doing what I'm doing and what I think it amounts to. So in the recent past, I've been in my position for 5.5 years. And recently, I've come to see the project as a place for science to face itself or confront itself. And by science, please remember, I'm always meaning it in the Latin or the Germanic sense, which is the human, social, and the natural sciences, which is not the case necessarily with the Science Gallery model as it started out, but we'll come to that in a little bit. I also see this as a two-way bridge between research and the public. Yesterday it was wonderful to listen to Debjani, who's here at the University of Zurich, talking about the return to the archive. And that sort of felt very affirming to me, because as a historian of science, I returned to the archive when I took on the project of setting up this space. Because what is it that a space like this does? It follows in the tradition of public spaces for knowledge. After the Cabinet of Curiosities, which in Europe is, widely known, in India less so, museums were spaces where the public, the researcher, and the object of scientific inquiry occupied the self-same space. And so there was a visibility for the researcher on the public on the object of scientific inquiry, as well as the researcher. And in this space, one did not have to talk about the bringing together of the art of art, aesthetics, and research. It was always already there. That, of course, changed with the changing nature of research, the changing nature of scientific inquiry. There were also spaces earlier, which now I see as public labs, but they were called by different names. So, for example, the Royal Institution in the United Kingdom, but also in India, a place called the Indian Association for Cultivation of Science, which had laboratories which were accessible to the public, where you could go and listen to Christmas lectures or Christmas talks, but you could also participate by paying a small bench fee and become a researcher yourself, irrespective of what your daytime job was. You could be an accountant during the day and a researcher by evening. You could be a mathematician by evening and a lawyer by day. You could do this. This, of course, again, is no longer possible. But what am I taking from here? What I'm taking from the idea of the museum is the need, or asking if there is a need, and I'm convinced there is, for the public to have a relationship with the object of scientific inquiry. What are the questions that are being asked? What should I know about those? Now, these public lab-like spaces were also places where the public not only had visibility on the object of scientific inquiry, but they could also participate. And that today, again, is very, very difficult. We call things interactive, but they aren't really inviting participation on the terms on which the public might want to participate. They're terms usually set by those who set up these spaces. So very early on, drawing on this archive, drawing on this understanding, I told myself that this space was going to be one which not only showcased the coming together of the human, social, and natural sciences with art, design, and engineering, but it was a place where this collaboration would also be delivered. And therefore, it had to become a space with experimental labs, but also exhibition galleries, interspersed such that they're not separated, and that there is a visible connect between experiments and between what was sort of being showcased as an already delivered collaboration. So the building, for those of you who will hopefully visit us in Bangalore, I call it a fishbowl model. I've worked together with the architects. I can't say I'm satisfied, but then as those who know me, I'm rarely a satisfied person. I'm always miserable. I enjoy my misery. But it is a building in which you see the labs. So if you go to an exhibition, if you go to one of our exhibition halls and you walk out, you see a lab behind a wall of this kind. And so creating also the aspiration to want to participate in experiment. At the end of the day, why do this? And this is a question that others have also asked. So, Nicola Triscutt, for example, who established Arts Catalyst in London, wrote her thesis and some publications where she tried to answer the question, why bring largely designers, artists, and engineers in conversation with human, social, and natural sciences? She has a few answers. I'm not entirely sure I've worked my way through them, but it's a question that Ravi asked me at breakfast this morning as well, which is, what is the relationship between fundamental knowledge and the public? And what is the role of public spaces, but also art, in this? And I think that is the question that I'm trying to answer in the setting, in the institutional design of the space that I'm trying to set up. Because what is at stake is something, I might have a hunch, I might have a version of that answer, but I think it is an answer that we need to collectively explore across disciplines and across practices. So bear with me as I now give you sort of, what they call the company narrative. So we are a part of an international network of galleries that started out at Trinity College, Dublin. We have 6 siblings, apart from Bangalore, so 4 in Europe, 1 in the United States, 1 in Mexico, and 1 in Australia. So apart from Bangalore, all 6 galleries are exhibition galleries. And they're located on university campuses and owned by universities. Bangalore is an outlier for several reasons that are relevant to the Indian context. I'm happy to come to them at a later point. So we are an autonomous institution, as a result of which we were able to do what we have done, which is have these experimental spaces. So instead of having one university partner, what we have is a founding partner in the state government, so the federal government of Karnataka, which is where Bangalore is, or Bangalore is the capital of Karnataka. And we work with 3 academic partners instead of 1, because of course, why should 1 be enough? We've got 3. But we have what are called non-binding agreements with them. So we have conversations, we work with the researchers, but nothing about it is binding, which is great because that allows us the freedom to work with as many research and cultural institutions in India, but also across the world as may be required. Now, the tagline for the network was, where art and science collide. Now, again, reaching back into the archive, what we find is that this sort of dissonance, or this at least projected dissonance between fundamental knowledge and art is of recent origins. There weren't even disciplines, about if you look at the history of, if you look at about 150 years ago, there was natural philosophy, there was moral philosophy. You didn't have to argue for a place for aesthetics in knowledge making and knowledge learning. And so it didn't sit very well with me. And so I asked myself, okay, so what is it that we are doing? And so of course, as I said, the science bucket became bigger. It was not just natural sciences alone, but also the art bucket became bigger. And I say this with sort of complete awareness of how contentious using the word culture is. I'm happy to again answer questions on that and share my tentative thoughts on it. But I thought we were working with art, but the larger domain was one of culture. Because if science is a sort of reified and rarefied domain in especially India, but also elsewhere, then so is art, right? And so how do you bring back science into culture, and how do you sort of make it about the everyday, and therefore make in the process also art about the everyday, right? That doesn't mean you dislodge them from their inquiries, but it means you transform their relevance and their presence in day-to-day life. Easier said than done, but we'll come to that. But the operational word is experiment here, and it has teeth. Everything is an experiment, of course. I mean, my sort of deciding that I was not going to be a straightforward academic anymore and going and thinking that I could even set up this was an experiment. But it's an experiment because it's an effort, and I'm well aware that time will, tell us that it might even fail. But it's an effort to reimagine what a public space for knowledge might look like in order to establish that relationship between the public and the relationship that I spoke about. So experiment is the operational word. And this is sort of the commitments that we have is we work, of course, with young adults. So the idea is that we work very closely for all of our closed programs with the age group largely 18 to 28. We say 15 to 30, but it's 18 to 28 because legal minors and all sorts of other liabilities come in. The word experiment is operationalized in the public lab complex, where there's a commitment to open research. So in fact, we are in the process of developing what we call a digital public lab notebook, so that we can collaborate across, basically collaborate with whoever we want, and whoever would like to work with us. And in the end, of course, what's the long-term goal? It is to shape culture. And of course, again, the contentious nature of culture is not lost on me. Not going to speak with my eyes. Okay. So this is what we call our way, the Science Gallery Bangalore way. This is not clear, or maybe it's not clear because I'm not wearing my specs. Can you read it? Broadly? Oh, good. Okay. So those are the experimental spaces. On the side, we have a nature lab. Now, again, coming back to a question that came up, and those of you who were here yesterday will probably recognize the thought. If we are in the Anthropocene and we wish to reimagine our relationship to nature at this moment, then what are the questions to ask? What are the good research questions to ask in academic disciplines? Because we are where we are because of the kind of questions and kind of knowledge we generated about nature in the past. So if we want to reach another place, what are those new questions that we need to ask of nature, of materials, of a range of things? So that's the starting point for the nature lab. We have a materials lab, a new media lab, a humanities lab, a theory lab, a food lab, a black box theater. All of us know what a black box theater is. What we've done is we are rigging it also in addition to sound and light for data and lasers, so that we can, if we want, study kinetics in that room and have experiments with kinetics, but also deep space experience, right? Like augmented reality, virtual reality, experiments that hopefully will be developed in the new media lab. Bear in mind, so how will the lab complex run? We want to run it on a fellowship model, where the proposals are looked at by a jury of people drawn from across disciplines and practices, and therefore the idea is that we don't look at whether someone is an artist or in the sort of world outside, an artist or a scientist or what. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what stage of your career you're in, but if the idea holds value to the thematic open call, then you come, you spend a year and talk to people, minimum of a year, and you talk to people who you do not have access to in your day-to-day life, to have those deep conversations and explore what it might mean to your own practice. In an ideal and wonderful world where there are rainbows and everything, something new will come out of this conversation. In the meanwhile, if everyone goes back and does what they were already doing in a slightly different way, I think we've already won the day. So I think that's the idea behind the lab complex. Again, happy to speak later. The public engagement complex is sort of obvious. Exhibition galleries, reading rooms, the regular stuff. And then some community spaces for people to come in as groups and use the space the way they want. So we've, in the building, created a lot of nooks and corners which are for just hanging out, just kind of sitting, doing, talking, whatever comes to mind. So just as I spoke, in public engagement, exhibition seasons. Now, what we've done with exhibitions is that we've we've combined a bunch of ideas. So again, these are not ideas that haven't existed in the historical past, but we're trying to bring them together to see what comes out of them when they're actually in practice together in the same complex, right? So in the exhibition seasons, as we call them, I think one might actually call them research festivals. So the exhibition is at the core of it, but every exhibit is cracked open at both ends in order to understand what went into the making of the exhibit, so what kind of knowledge practices people went into it, is made visible. So the process is made visible. Again, nothing new. Many of us are doing that. And at the other end, to ask further questions of it. Can we depart from this exhibit into asking new questions, into opening up, new ideas, and can we work together on those? So just to give you one example to make it concrete, because abstract sort of things often don't stick. We had an exhibit. So when we in our exhibition on water, which is when Ravi and I first met, we had an exhibit called Terra Mars, which was by an Chinese-American artist living in New York. What he had done was he had taken the detailed topographical data of Earth and Mars and transposed them onto each other by developing an algorithm and coding for very, very detailed satellite imagery on both. So when, as a member of the audience, you walked in, it was a large, darkened room, and you saw a blue planet with unfamiliar topography, and you saw a familiar topography, but with a different color. And so it was dissonant, and the starting point for the artist, was that we are looking for water on Mars, but not really caring for water on Earth, but also that Mars and Earth started out on similar trajectories, but then went into different directions in their sort of process of becoming the planets they are. What we did was we sort of made visible on screens the process of the transposition itself, so that someone who came in could actually see what the artist had developed, so the making of it. And then at the other end, we had 3 workshops, where the first one was on data scraping. And remember, the participants come from across disciplines, right? Like, so they are artists, architects, historians, whatever. And when we select, we of course make sure that there's a good spread of expertise, or not expertise, but backgrounds. And so the first workshop was on data scraping, where we looked for what kinds of data on water is available for us to access. How do you access it? How do you assess it? How do you compare it with each other? How do you tell whether this is useful or not? And what can you do with it? right? So we had data activists who were working with the artists, with the architects, with everybody in the room. The second workshop was on aerial mapping of water. So how do you read aerial maps of water? What does it tell you? What does it tell you about the planet? So creating kind of, if for lack of a better word, a literacy around, and remember, yeah. So that, and then of course, how do you map water aerially? So we had a bunch of drones, and the young people went out, and there was luckily a little stream-like thing behind. Well, actually, it wasn't quite a stream. It's more of a sewage thing running behind the exhibition space. But we mapped that, and then read it for. So how do you read this? What does this patch tell you? What does that patch tell you, etc. So we did that. The third was an experiment, more of an experiment, where we got a fluid dynamicist and a science fiction writer in a room, together with this bunch of mad mix of people. And the starting point for the workshop was there's water on Mars. And so the science fiction writer pushed everyone to start thinking of, oh, there is water on Mars. See, there's something more interesting going on there. And the fluid dynamicist kept bringing people back to saying, okay, so if this is the case, if this is your assumption, these are the ways in which gravity or the behavior of water will respond under these circumstances, right? And so there was this constant tussle with them, and we weren't really sure how it went, because the young people in the workshop got lots out of it. Some, went ahead and made graphic panels. Some wrote little pieces about it. Someone discovered a new discipline, just sort of, that they were not exposed to. I mean, imagine an 18-year-old person. And I recently met the science fiction writer and the fluid dynamicist separately in different occasions. I was like, well, that was a little bit, I guess, difficult conversation between the two of you, because they didn't know each other before we called them in. And they said, no, that was really, really fabulous, because our impression at the end of the workshop was this is horrible, and we're never going to try this again until people know each other, whatever. But a couple of years down the line, they were very, very happy with what happened during the workshop, because they not only got things from each other, but also from the young people participating in the workshop. So we tried to do this. And the formats, we're sort of fairly agnostic about formats, disciplines, anything, but we try to do this kind of stuff with every exhibit that we have in there. Then we have public lectures, we have tutorials with those, a film festival, we develop games, we put up open access games, we do performances, and a range of other activities, including developing open courseware from the lectures and the activities. So, putting together lectures that are given by filmmakers, artists, epidemiologists, all speaking to the self-same thing, in order for these resources to be used beyond our walls and beyond the workshops, physical workshops, so that this idea can actually replicate. And that, I think, for me, means scaling up, not to bring 50 people instead of the 20 in the workshop, but actually create a module out of it so that it can travel well. So that's why ending up calling it a research festival. So the lab complex I already spoke about. Mentoring young adults, we develop various programs in the labs. We'll have apprentices, and in the public engagement program, we have mediators who are trained, etc. Happy to speak to that later. Digital initiatives, something we realized during the pandemic that is very, very important. If we wanted, we saw audiences that we didn't imagine would be our audiences coming online to listen in, including digital natives, but also those who really don't want to get out of the house for various reasons. Also, young people in other countries, we saw that they were staying up at odd hours just to participate in the workshop, etc. And so we've now decided that this initiative will continue alongside the physical stuff that we will do in our building. These are the, I know, I'll be done, I promise. So we've done 5 research festivals so far. The first 2 were physical, the next 3 were online. Elements was to mark 150 years of the periodic table. Submerge was all about water. Phytopia was the world of plants. Contagion about the transmission of diseases, ideas, and behaviors. And Psyche, of course, about the wonderful mind that we have, and how the mind is the tool that we use to understand the mind, right? Like, so the kind of just lovely lovely thing that it is, the completely mad thing that it is. And so just one sentence about the exhibition seasons or the research festivals is that given the nature of our work, we don't work with narratives and in fact work with sort of messages that are embedded, or all exhibits, all activities speak to a message or two that has to go out, but not a narrative. Because what we are trying to do, and I don't know how successfully, time will tell, is to deliver the tools for interpretation to our audiences in order to become the true participants that we'd like them to become, instead of sort of providing an interpretation, which would be anyway one or maybe half. And that's also why we have a relatively clustered curatorial team, and we have good people like Ravi who agree to work with us, and work with the sort of work with my team, the average age of which is 26, and all of us kind of think we have we all vote and we all have one vote, and that's how we select participants, etc. We work within India, but also outside of India, and we collaborate with relevant research partners and cultural institutions, scientific, and that's why sort of the knowledge partners, but also cultural partners. Similarly in India, so sort of trying to break as many boundaries as possible. We keep saying it's opening in 23. Let's hope it opens in 23. It looks like it will. So we're right. Yeah, sort of. It's looking quite like this right now. So I'm reasonably satisfied with it. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. I would like to invite you to ask questions now as well, while Mira and Monica maybe get mic'd up for the panel discussions. Could you go to... Do you have to mic up? Yeah, good. So would somebody like to ask questions about this quite ambitious project?
Hi, Janavi. It's fantastic to hear about this. If this building is just finished now, were you doing all these exhibitions in other sites, other institutions?
So other locations within the city, and then during the pandemic, of course, everything was online.
More questions? Yes. Please just say your name quickly and then say.
My name is Lisa. A quick question. I noticed you had anti-disciplinary on there, and I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit about that.
So it's a constant battle between the team and within ourselves. And there's no antagonism, but whether to use anti-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, or trans. Because we are really, we are working, we are agnostic to what disciplines people come from, but we respect the disciplinary rigor and training that everyone brings with them, whether it's in the form of craft, or it's in the form of knowledge, or it's in the form of skill, or artistic abilities, right? So the word anti-disciplinary, it's not ours. The MIT Media Lab started using it, and for them, anti-disciplinary is the space between disciplines that remains unexplored, simply because disciplines grow in silos. So that was the attraction of using the word anti-disciplinary, but we are not wedded to it. In fact, we kind of often discuss every time we put up something whether this is a relevant word, and the current consensus in the team is that we will use any of these depending on the circumstances where it's relevant, in order to indicate that disciplinary knowledge, disciplinary depth is important, but it is equally, if not more important, to exceed that once you have it, right, and to extend it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. That was wonderful to hear, and I'm really excited to see how the project picks up. You mentioned at the beginning that the other 6 sister galleries were all on university campuses.
Correct.
And how you altered this model for your context.
Correct.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about the context and what sort of the needs are of getting your audience and stakeholders on the same page?
Sure, thank you. They're not on the same page. They never, I mean, they rarely are, exactly. No, so I'll tell you what. So in India, we don't don't really have universities, right? Like we have institutions of higher learning. So they're highly specialized. So between the ages of 15 and 17, young people are herded off into professional institutions. So architects study with architects, engineers with engineers, so on and so forth, right? As a result of which, a 17-year-old, well, let me put it this way, forget 17. When they're studying, an engineer has never actually met a historian and had dinner with them or a coffee with them to understand how they think, or a dancer for that matter. And so there is very little understanding or even insight. I mean, if you've hung out with people, had your drinks, no matter which one, choose your poison with them, if you've not dated beyond disciplines, I mean, literally, it's like they're growing up in prisons of different kinds, intellectual and social. And so that interaction, that conversation is not there, as a result of which I think we have highly shrunken, well, how should I put it? Intellectually shrunken understanding of the mandates of professional life or artistic life or other kinds of life, right? Like, social life. And so how do you, in a context of this kind, create an exhibition gallery where artists and scientists are working together, not working together, where the products of their products, for lack of a better word, but the outcomes of their collaboration are showcased, but there is nowhere to do that. Because even someone like me, who's allegedly on paper the director of an institution, if I have to enter a scientific institution that's not affiliated with us or that's not working with us, I need to make entries, and they need to know who I'm visiting, and they need to know why I'm going there. And so in this context, then, how do you, it would have to exceed being an exhibition gallery, because what's the point of showing work from across the world? I think also because of the audience culture, in a sense, like the museum-going or gallery-going culture on the subcontinent, if I may argue, but definitely in India, which is that, so I call it the darshan mode. So for those of you not familiar with the Indian languages, darshan is like, you go on a pilgrimage, you see the image of the god, and you leave, right? Like, and so essentially, you walk into an exhibition, you see this, and you go. You've not engaged, you've not connected, because you don't have the tools or the ontology, right? Like, or the worldview, or the world in order to connect to what's being shared with you. And so I felt that it would be incomplete to have an exhibition gallery, which would, what purpose would it serve? And so there had to be a space where this coming together was the purpose and not the showcasing of this coming together, which is why the labs kind of began. And then, of course, everything kind of added on to it.
Hi, Jahanavi. Thank you so much. I'm Devjani. So I have two questions. One is, you said the average age is 26 of your team, which I think is fantastic. And can you tell us what that has made possible to be working with this young people? And then I was thinking, you mentioned right at the beginning about this the digital public lab notebooks, which I find quite fascinating. Yeah. And I was wondering, what's your vision with having that? What would be the goal you would like to reach? Thank you so much.
World conquest, right? Like, okay. No, so coming back to the 26-year-olds, right? So India is a young country. Our target audience also happens to be young people. So if you don't have young people in your team, of course, this is now the post facto argument. Okay, I'll also come back and tell you why that happened. If you don't have them, in a way, you're not going to be able to catch the idiom of the generation, right? Like, of the young people. Because, I can say bro only that many times in a day, right? Like, and indicate that I'm with them, and they know very well I'm not with them. In fact, I came home once when I realized that they'd gone it's a small team. They went and partied without me. And I came back heartbroken, and Roland was like, do you not realize, Roland's husband, do you not realize that no matter how hard you try, you're their boss, right? And I'm like, but I don't behave like one. It's like, it doesn't matter. So it's important that if your target age group is young adults, that the young adults ought to be participating in doing that. It happened, though, because of a different reason. Because when we first started advertising for positions, we got people who came from the sciences with advanced degrees who were convinced that this was science communication. And once they found out that I actually came from the humanities myself, it was like, oh my God, who even allowed you to do this? Right? And then they were like, oh no, but you're nice, you're doing all this work, come, let me teach you a thing or two. And of course, you could teach me a thing or two, but only that much. Again, old dog, new tricks, that kind of thing, right? So that was the problem. But people from the humanities, the minute they saw the word science, it was like, no, this is not for me. right? And so they didn't even apply to our position. So in fact, we did a study. I mean, we actually did a study with a third party, paid lots of money. And this was the outcome. So as a result of which, what I ended up doing was going to universities and getting kids straight out of university, right? Like out, just like literally campus placement kind of situation. So they bring the energy, they bring an understanding of their generation, they bring the idiom of their generation. They also bring lots of unprofessionalism, meaning they don't know what it is to work because they've never worked before, which is great because they're not sort of, tied down by anything. And so they just do, and it's been good. They buy into things more quickly than others would if they've worked before. Sorry, the second question, the public lab notebook. So the public lab, it started again, same thing, reaching out into the archive. So you have no idea what you've done, by saying that. Lab notebooks is what us historians have gone back to again and again to see what was happening for science in action. What was that laboratory life, right? Like, so the lab notebook has been a very interesting object for me. In fact, even when I write in my notebook, my notes and things like that, I try to kind of can't draw to save my life, but try to make it feel like a lab notebook. And so I was like, how do we do this? Because this will be then the log of what kind of conversations and collaborations are happening in this space, and especially if we want people to work across those spaces. So the mandate is not to come and work in one, but I know I carry on too much. So how do you keep a record of these conversations? Which is not merely these many people from these many disciplines participated this year, right? And so the notebook became the idea, and then this wonderful team of young people, they were like, but then a digital notebook is a much better way to integrate these things, and then that also allows us to collaborate or continue with experiments even when people leave, right? And we can work with people from wherever. We can sort of have simultaneous work happening on site, but also off site. So it enables a range of things. And there's a commitment also to open research, open databases, trying to make knowledge a public good, knowledge as sort of, belonging in the commons. And so this became kind of a tool then to insert and to also expand our boundaries. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think take a deep breath, please.
Yes.
Get a glass of water, have a seat. I would like to now expand the discussion with two more invited guests. Then I'm very happy that they came. One of them is Monika Rosina Jäger. She's an artist and researcher. We'll say a little bit more about what she does soon. Please join us on stage. And Mira Hirz, who's also an artist and a curator. And of course, the reason why we invited you to this discussion, now we are taking sides? Yeah, no.
My mic is...
like that, is very specific. So we got a glimpse into this huge project you're doing and about how you're approaching it and how you're mixing things up in a way by also still going back to certain ideas that are historic but maybe have been neglected a little bit. Yes. And this whole discussion we're having these 2 days about collaborations between art and science and the problems regarding collaborations between art and science are also questions of methods. That's why we kind of boldly put the title Art as Method, ? And the reason we invited Monika and Mira is quite specific. Mira Hirz is an artist with her own practice, quite performative based, one could say. But you're also the co-curator of a traveling exhibition, Critical Zones, that has traveled now from Germany to quite a few places already in India. And I will just get back to that in a second. And Monika Rosina Jäger, most of you know, is an artist based here in Zurich in London, and is the only artist I know of, and I'm happy to learn about more, who's a full-time faculty member of a STEM science-based research institute, which is the Institute for Natural Resources at the ZHAW in Wädenswil. So that's something that, I mean, you're still the only one, which kind of freaks me out, but there will be a lot of those with you, right? So that's one of the reasons we invited you. But just to get everybody on the same speed, Mira, could you talk quickly about this exhibition, Critical Zones, what it was all about, and how and why the German government, in its unending wisdom, decided to send it to India?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me, Damian, in these 2 days, and thanks all of you for coming. I'm going to try to sum it up shortly. Please tell me if it's too long, because there's a lot to talk about. Critical Zones is an exhibition that was originally taking place at a museum in Karlsruhe in Germany that's called the ZKM, so that's the Center for Art and Media, mainly focusing on the so-called new media, whatever that might mean, in the arts. And this exhibition was originally curated by Bruno Latour, philosopher who passed away recently, and Peter Weibel, director of the ZKM, who also passed away recently. So this exhibition also now became a bit of a memorial situation. This exhibition was put together, and Bruno Latour, as a philosopher, did many exhibitions in his life together with the ZKM as a way to create a kind of thinking space for questions of how do we position ourselves to the planet that we're living on, and very much as this symposium is also dealing with how do different disciplines of art, architecture, design, aesthetics, the humanities, the natural sciences come together in doing that. I think what was or is quite unique about this exhibition is probably really this idea that it's a thought exhibition in a way, Gedankenausstellung in German, a thought exhibition. So that means that it was a testing ground, very much so. And it was at the ZKM already the idea to, as Janavi was talking about, create this public space where an audience was invited in to talk about things, to bring them somewhere else, to maybe bring them further, rather than having a closed-off presentation of results of something. I'm saying that because I think this was also the decision why this exhibition then went for this traveling tour through India. While Bruno Latour was still alive, he was always really keen on testing his ideas, testing the curatorial ideas from these exhibitions, and as I said, really finding out what is actually being communicated, and is anything being communicated, and what is the response to that? And he was really excited about the idea to bring this exhibition, which was and is very international, with artists and scientists coming from many different continents, still to bring that entirely to a different continent and see what happens, basically. So, in collaboration with the Goethe Institute, South Asia, it traveled last year to where did we start? Mumbai, Pune, and Colombo in Sri Lanka, and will. This year it was already in Kolkata, and next year it will go to the Science Gallery in Bangalore, which I'm super happy about, and to Delhi. So far I think, for me, it was already the experience that a lot of new questions came up, and a lot of things felt like, oh, we kind of need to rethink them. And I know I haven't talked so much about what the actual contents of the exhibition are, but I think it's all very much related to the things that you will hear more about today.
So, Critical Zones. Critical Zones, of course, deals with questions of nature and the crisis and all these kind of questions, but is a deeply scientific-minded exhibition, one could argue, within an art context, though. It's an art exhibition. And you said that different questions arose. So you did an experiment. You put a German exhibition with global attendance into a different context, and now you did it quite a few times to see if it speaks differently, if the reactions are differently, to find out things. Can you name one thing you found out?
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind for me always when I think about that is I have to explain a little bit more. Critical zones, I don't know if you're familiar with that term. I wasn't, certainly, when I heard it first. Is a term that Bruno Latour, in his theories on geopolitics and the ecological crisis, took from the natural sciences. And it's actually a term that describes the very, very thin layer of the Earth in which life actually takes place. I think if we, well, for me at least, if you would have talked to me before, I would have said, well, yeah, but the whole Earth is populated by life. That, of course, is not actually true. We have a very thin layer in which the conditions are giving so that life can take place. And that is the zone called the critical zone. Bruno Latour took this term and is kind of offered it to the humanities, to the arts, I think also in order to really think about how do we focus our attention on that which is happening right in front of us, right underneath our feet, right above us in this really thin and dense layer. So that means that this thinking process and this whole exhibition was a lot about how do we inhabit the very local area that we live on, how do we inhabit this planet, how do we inhabit this critical zone. And something that struck me again and again while traveling it now through India is that I felt like there were and Sri Lanka, very different ways of inhabiting space that I was confronted with, that I'm not familiar with, having grown up in Europe, which are probably, kind of simple observations in the first moment, but really about how do you share a city? How do you share a city, not only meaning with the human inhabitants, but all the inhabitants in there? How does that come? How does it come together? How does a history of colonialism play into that? As opposed to, of course, Europe also has a history of colonialism, but the other way around. So they're very, very different ways of inhabiting. That I found super interesting and I think are very relevant for this question of art and science.
Mm-hmm. So this question of art and science is something that you also deal with daily. I mean, you have your own artistic practice with the studio. The ones of you who don't know her work, there will be an opening this Thursday at Kunsthaus Zurich, I believe, where a big work of you will be shown in the exhibition Time. So go and check it out. And then you also work as an artist, explicitly as an artist within that scientific research unit, etc. of it. And you've been doing that for quite a while now. How long have you been doing that?
I've been collaborating with them since 20 years. And since 8 years, I'm a faculty member, so quite a long time. And it is an institute of natural Resource Sciences, so Institut für Umwelt und natürliche Ressourcen. And the research they conduct is everything that sits in engineering and natural sciences and environmental sciences that supports society to successfully transform into a sustainable society. And that's sort of, it's applied sciences. I think that's very important to know. And when this institution formed, I heard about it through press and I approached the dean and I told him quite boldly, as I was 20 years ago, I said, well, if you want to be successful, you need an artist in your team. And he was And he said, well, okay, why not? And he placed me with all these scientists, and they didn't know what to do with me. And over these 20 years now, we have found a working method on how we can do that. And so one part is research, and the other part is teaching. And teaching is easy to explain, because teaching means we have bachelor and master students in the environmental sciences. And I teach them how they can very simply use artistic tools to work with their scientific endeavors they have. And the aim is not that they become artists, but the aim is that they learn how art works, what artistic questions can be, what an artistic process can be, in the hope that when they go out in their practice, they are familiar with these processes. So when they work with artists, first of all, that they have the idea to work with artists because they see the benefit of it, and they understand the artists better in what they do. So it's sort of a preparation for scientists to be ready for art-science collaborations.
You say that quite nonchalantly. No, how artists work, that you try to teach them how artists work. Which is something I've been trying to find out for the last 25 years, right? But artist method question mark. Could you give me one example where you find that when you talk about artist method with students coming from applied science, where you kind of need to make something very clear that maybe to our world is quite clear anyway, but needs to be said out aloud and kind of thought about again when confronted with these kind of students?
I mean, when you're working in the environmental sciences, everything you do follows an experimental design. Mm-hmm. And if you want to have funding, if you hand in a proposal, you have to declare this design, the experimental design, in a way that someone else could repeat it under the same conditions. Art doesn't work like that. Art starts with a material, a thought, an idea, a story, a feeling, something we've read or heard, and starts in a very sort of open-ended process. And with something that is very familiar to all of us who work in the arts is extremely alien for an institution like the UNR, ZHW, and the people who work in there. Mm.
But I mean, going back to the archive of science that you talked about, when I read Humboldt's diary, for example, right, as one does on a Sunday morning, it always strikes me that for him, this distinction between the poetic impulse to do something and then the scientific, and he was thorough, right? I mean, he went up and took measurements, but the starting point was exactly the same. This distinction between the poetic, let's call it art, and between the scientific, the measuring, and the experiment design there was no such distinction. I mean, I'm not a science historian like you, but how do you read that?
So I think the example that is thrown often at us, and also was at the heart of the Science Gallery, the first one that was set up at Trinity College Dublin. In fact, the advisory group is called the Leonardos, for that reason, which is exactly as you say, that these distinctions weren't so clear. It was the quest for learning more, and what was involved in that learning process was very, very diverse, right? Like, so precision was not away from precision was not separate from the aesthetic, and aesthetic was not separate from fundamental knowledge, right? And so how do you now, after 150 odd years of not only disciplinary silos, but also, the kind of knowledge it has allowed us to create about the planet we live on, and therefore relate to it in that manner, how does one get back to that relationship, but not necessarily, because there is, as we found out with Debjani, there is no return to innocence in a way. So how can we think of that relationship today, drawing on what insights are offered by history, but how do you make it relevant for today? Again, easier said than done. Like teach them how artists do or what artists think. Similarly said, how do you create the space for, or also the room for exploring what this thinking beyond silos, or bringing the aesthetic together with an aesthetic sensibility also together with other things. I think in the human sciences we've still kind of made room for that, aesthetics and politics, for example, aesthetics and social relations, but we haven't had that much, how should I put it, opportunity to do it also with sciences, with natural sciences and engineering.
But I think there's a level even deeper than that, right?
Yeah.
Elodie and Pong and I, we did a very small show once on the topic of wonderment as the roots of science and arts, to kind of really rethink of where we come from. And I mean, most of us have been doing what we do quite a while now, and we tend to forget why the heck we got into it in the first place. And I think this is also, again, Humboldt, I know, difficult character maybe, but so in his diary, he just barely survives the Orinoco, hasn't eaten for 3 weeks, has a fever, I don't know, his left eye is bleeding, right? Has a headache now for 2 years, and he encounters this incredible flower, and he just starts weeping because it's so beautiful. Well, maybe he hasn't eaten for 3 weeks, but still, it's an emotional wonderment, right? It's something very deep that motivates the arts and the science. It's a wonderment which leads then to wanting to know. Yeah. And I think we constantly need to keep reminding ourselves of that. And that's why I also want to ask you, Mira, I mean, you were co-curator of this traveling show now, but you're not like a philosopher by training, like the...
Little bit,
but I mean, I know, but I mean, this is not where you come from. I mean, you kind of transformed it into an artistic practice. Yeah. And looked at exhibition making from that point. And it was very interesting to me when I asked you that you said, one of the first differences I noticed in questions that arose is how the body moves within spaces and the different body move within the spaces of the city and the exhibition and all these kind of things. Yeah. So how would you say, this is just an assumption, did it help you to have these artistic sensibilities to bring a German show to completely different environment?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm not sure if I can say if it helped me with a particular transition of this German-based show into another country or continent. But I think for me, personally, I would say generally it just helps with exhibition making, for sure. And it helps with having a curiosity for probably exactly what you just said, for how different mindsets come together in a space and how that might be possible or not be possible, and trying to create spaces where you could build some kind of architecture where there can be a dialogue. I think very much so. I think what because I come from the performing arts, so I come from arts that very much deal with a sense of stage. I mean, I haven't worked in classical stages for a very long time, but let's say I more come from the idea of stage than from the idea of space as such. I know that's, of course, very similar. But I feel like what maybe it helped for me is to have that idea of just this kind of hypothesis of there's a stage and whatever you put on there doesn't have a hierarchy. You can just put it all together and see what happens. And you don't really have to define what each of these actors is already going to be and what might already happen. And I think that's maybe something that helps me sometimes. This very embodied notion of I'm going to work with this material that I have here right now, which could be the body, which could be something else, and I'm going to see where that leads, and I'm going to have to be... For me, performers work with the unknown. That's the material performance artists work with, for me very much, even more so dances, where I come from. So I can only speak for that, but I feel like that is something that helped me a lot, and that I feel like is a responding aspect in many other artworks and exhibitions and public platforms and things where new experience can happen, where things like that come together, which actually, for me, these qualities are in there as well, if that makes any sense.
Well, I mean, it says on your science gallery, right? Science, culture, experiment.
Yes.
And I think we should maybe slide over to that a little bit. But keep asking the question, we need to keep asking ourselves this whole day, why the arts? To bring it into the cultural spheres. Why not sports? I mean, cricket is quite popular, I read, in India.
It is.
You could say, hey, let's collaborate with cricket. I don't know how that would work, and it's not my field, but it could be quite interesting. But most of us, interestingly enough, and not just because we come from the arts, you don't in a way, right?
No, I don't. Yeah.
Why the arts for experiment?
Yeah. So I think, in a way, you began to answer this question when you brought up Humboldt and the wonderment that you spoke about, right? So when I think of what that relationship between those wonderful naturalistic collections, those researchers, and the public who went in was, it was that wonderment, right? Like, oh my God, what is this? I have no idea. Or, I mean, they had everything from deformed fetuses in what's it called? Formaldehyde. Thank you. To taxidermy collections from across the world, to herbariums, to who knows what else. I mean, rock collections, fossil collections, etc. It was, that sense of wonder was right in front of you, right? And I think for both art and science, that has now receded, right? Like both the spaces as well as those practices have in a way distanced us from feeling that, right? Like, if you're not practicing, I mean, of course, as a scientist, as an artist, you still might feel it. So how do you create that? And I think there, it's going to sound so trite when I say it, but that moment that drives someone to, I need to find out why, or I need to explore how, why, which are starting points for anyone who's who's creating either knowledge or a work of any kind, right? Like, and craft, I think I would also include craft in it, right? I think that's different, and sorry, that it's there, right? And I think that art, craft, and knowledge making, there is that desire to know, to do more. I don't quite know how it works for sports. I'm really not a sporting person. I mean, I barely exercise enough to stay alive, but I wonder what that might even look like, right? Like, not. I mean, just as a thought experiment, what might the other things be to bring together? But this is, in a way, it's almost like I feel we are bringing back together what already anyway belonged together, right? Like, so it's not even introducing something new in the mix.
Exactly. I mean, and this is what really bugs me at so many of these institutions and moments, right? Like, we come together, we do what we do, and everybody stays entrenched within their own. And the artists and curators or anybody is no exception. We in the art world, we like to criticize science. We like to say, they're very narrow-minded. They're in their computers or in their labs and don't work outside. But in a lot of ways, at least now we can then start to discuss more publicly, but in a lot of ways, we're the same. I mean, this moment of Michael Günzburger yesterday described, right, of coming together and just let things happen in the process of making art, it's just too seldom. And to open up ourselves to the moment of experience, for example, right? And then to go and do art, be the performing art, too complicated long-term research. That kind of, we still need to remind ourselves of that, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was really beautiful when you said, when you're talking about the stage and these performers sort of maybe uniting in a space. And I think when I started working with the scientists within an institution, and we have to remind ourselves that most scientists work in an institution. It's not like the artists who are roaming free, who are independent. Scientists always work within the boundary of an institution, which is, we sometimes forget, and which is a huge boundary, a huge barrier to these collaborations. But maybe we can come to that later. I want to talk something else. The problem is when artists and scientists work together, the question is for the scientists, you know, why would they want to work with artists? Mostly the artists say, well, maybe they just want to work with us because they want us to illustrate their findings. But mostly scientists, that's a misconception, first of all. And then scientists, they think, well, artists want to work with us because they're eager to get our results and then work from that, which is quite problematic as well. And when you actually come to collaboration, the question is, or if you ask the question, what is the result? And then you're doomed, because it's either science nor art. Most of these collaborations, when they considered art, it's a bit considered art in a very conservative way, I say. Then it's not really satisfying. And so we came up with this working method of the narrative environment. So what we do together is not creating art or science, but what we create is a narrative environment. And that helps everyone to free themselves from being loyal to their conservative part of their field. And I mean, contemporary art has a conservatism as well, in a sense that there are gatekeepers who claim they know or they can tell what contemporary art is and what is not. And this is a huge boundary. So when you work together, when you want to have this Humboldt moment, it's really important that you let go of all this. And for us, for our team, it was the term narrative environment that is sort of...
Can I respond to that?
Helpful, yeah.
Because thank you for that. It really reminded me of question being asked to Bruno Latour of, okay, how do art and science come together? And I think he said something like, well, you can't have them come together like that. They need to have a question together that they're going to work for. I don't know if I would, sign that statement so much, but I think what I found so interesting about the Critique Zone exhibition, or that whole initial research about it, was really that moment of saying, and I think that brings the institutions that we work in are also really are combined by, it's not just the question of art and science, it's also the question of ecological crisis that's somewhere in there, I feel like. And I think for him, for Bruno Latour, the question of his question was always, how do we land on this planet? How do we learn to inhabit it anew? Nobody knows how to do this. We are in disorientation. And in that moment, you need to bring everything together. And then you create something that has no discipline. That is something that is kind of in between everything, and brings up this moment of really just shedding the boundaries that you usually maybe live with.
What my team of 26-year-olds and me call the post-disciplinary, right? No, but I mean, just to critically reflect, I mean, it's not, I mean, most artists work independently, but it's not that we're not bound by these institutional barriers. I mean, of course, this now has been, thanks to Löwenbräu, thank you very much, supported very generously by this institution, and then the Kronos Initiative, which didn't ask for any application, luckily, right? But all of us, how many applications have we written in the last 3 or 4 years? And we know exactly, the ones of us who are good at it, we know which buzzwords to use, right? Which things to trigger so that we get a little bit of money to do whatever we need to do. I mean, that's exactly the same. And it's exactly the opposite of this, how does it come together? How do we recreate this moment, this spark, to then, embark on something, this radicality that we all had at one point, right? And need to refine constantly in the practice. And this is maybe the last kind of buzzword again, to come back to the notion of practice from all of that, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not even going to ask you questions, but maybe it's interesting if you could frame for yourselves and for us while doing that, what practice in this context might mean. Take your time. No, this is nothing, this is an experiment. It's not, we didn't prepare this talk at all, right? So, what is practice? I mean, this is an interesting question in this question of experiment and...
I think I would like to respond first, because I think that's the key question that could bring us forward to think through practice and not through discipline and not to end result or forms of publication. And forms of publication, I mean a scientific paper or an exhibition or an artwork or a program for young adults, an open lab, not thinking through these sort of genres or end results, but always think through practice. And I think art also can still do much more in thinking through practice, because it sort of liberates yourself from having to decide where you are and where you work. So I can only tell for myself, but my art, let's say, I only define it through practice. The things I do as an artist and doing research and publishing scientific papers is part of that artistic practice. And I find it very liberating for myself, because all of a sudden it allows you to work in very different fields, and I don't have to justify or myself to say whether is this art, is this mediation, is this science, is this collaboration. It just doesn't matter. So that, I guess, would be and I hope for scientists as well that they maybe less think about through the ways they can come to results and present them, but more through what it means to be a scientist and how to operate within that.
Yes, so I agree with a lot of what you said, and I think it's the open-endedness of it, I think, matters, because once you close the door on this is going to be the outcome or this is what has to come out of it, it's kind of problematic, which is also why, as I said at the start, I still don't know that I have a fully worked out answer for why the collaboration. Of course, I mean, there are various ways to answer the question, like, for example, this was always in a way, or this in a way did belong in interesting ways together, we're just kind of bringing it back together, etc. But there's the why. But I think what bringing together a bunch of people across disciplines and practices would mean is that they're a witness to each other's making, each other's practice, and in that witnessing, they're allowed to ask each other questions, right? Not in order to seek justification, but in order to ask, okay, so how, why, okay, this way, but what's the outcome of this, or why would you proceed in this manner? And so it's a conversation about why each of us does what we do, and I think that conversation hopefully will take people, in a way where they're ready to reach, right? Like, because you can't kind of drag people further than in a way they're able to at that moment. And there's nothing right or wrong about it. I mean, you create the gentle structures and the nudges to make that witnessing and that conversation possible. And then beyond that, I think, so often I'm asked, what are the agendas for this? So what is the scope and agenda for this lab? And I'm like, if I had to decide what's the point, I already know the answer. I'll hand you over the lab and I'll walk away. I'll go back and, read my books and write my books and hide under the bed. I mean, so it's the openness that kind of,
So what if we say that things that come out of this practice maybe in an old world would have been a scientific result or an artwork. What if we say that everything that comes out of these practices or appears for us to recognize are just manifestations of that? They are provisional manifestations. And I think it also needs from the other side, from the visitors, from the audience, from people who become witness of these manifestations, a kind of a toolbox or a literacy on how to read these manifestations, because they can no longer be decoded by old, you know what I mean? It's a bit complicated, but it sort of needs an openness from the audience and the spectator and the visitors as well to read or to engage with what they encounter. That is the manifestation of these processes.
I think what we can do is create conditions for that openness, and and then anticipate it probably. But beyond that, then again, it's whatever happens.
I enjoy sitting at your feet, but you're a little bit too harmonious at the moment. I mean, you said you agree with most of what she says. Is there a particular thing you disagree?
No.
Good. Then I'll let you find things. Could you? He was first. Could you please just state your name quickly? Like, hi, my name is Frank Radatz, and my question is.
Okay. My name is Frank Radatz, and my question is the art theory of Bruno Latour. I think this is a misunderstanding. The critical zones means that we live in a space where is a feedback loop between everything which is living. So a tree comes on the planet Earth or in the critical zones, and then it changed the whole terraforming of the planet Earth. And this is the idea of Bruno Latour, that we have to understand this, that we are living in India or in Europe or in China in these feedback loops. Yes, that means our activities have a feedback. So, and this, he wants that art is telling this to the people, because they don't understand facing Gaia or other writings. And this is very hard for the art, because he says there is no autonomy in the ecological crisis for art. We don't need art only to copy. We have the knowledge. It's not knowledge, it's knowledge. And Antje Boetius, Schellenhuber, all these guys which make in Germany this ecological discourse, say we have the knowledge, but the people don't understand it. And this is the same position of Bruno Latour. Yes? Okay, thank you.
But this would also mean that art then in a Bruno Latour exhibition is pure pedagogy.
Yeah, I kind of have to disagree with you a little bit. I'm sorry, but I do agree absolutely that a little bit that Bruno Latour and a lot of people that he works with are absolutely saying there's all this knowledge and what do we do now with it? But I think rather than that he wanted that art would then illustrate all this knowledge, he actually wanted art to, and this is a really old, thing that as contemporary artists we talk about a lot, but are obviously still talking about, to challenge the notion of representation. So actually saying, hold on, the moment where we then want art to go in and represent that knowledge, this is exactly where we kind of have to intervene and say that is not really possible. What do we do with this right now? And I think more than illustration, it's you talked about practice, and from what you said, I also gathered a lot. It's about observation, maybe. It's about a mode of awareness for the issues at stake in the moment of trying to represent knowledge and let it travel through a certain, ways of disciplines or society or whatever, and the issues that come up with that, and the aesthetics that are happening in there. I think this is at least what I understood from Bruno Latour and from being his student, what he talked about a lot and what he tried to do in this exhibition. At least whenever somebody said illustration, he was very careful.
But he says, sorry, only the sentence. He says, and he's writing it, art should duplicate this knowledge. And art has to serve. This is the idea. Art as a servant for the ecological crisis and the critical zones. Because is it so important when mankind don't understand it, the species will die. Of course, I don't like this idea. Yes, I don't. It's the same idea of nation or religion. The art should serve, but this is what he is writing. You can have another idea, but not.
I think he means something else with it. But yeah, we can go into it.
But
more.
I mean, this is a point which has been raised a lot, right? In a crisis, is there still the freedom to do whatever we want, or do we need to serve, to fight the crisis? Yep. I mean, but you have another question, I guess.
I do have another question. Thank you.
My name is...
Hi, my name is Marie Klasse, and I do have another question. Yes, because in a way I think I do disagree, with that very nice notion of openness, and that like the goal we should all have is to just destroy the boundaries between art and science, because I don't know, I would like to hear your opinion on that, but I'm not sure if that is not also very dangerous. Because if you think about Humboldt, let's get back to that, but then maybe they both come from the same idea of wondering about the world and wonderment, but then I would say, okay, science is really up for, oh, look at that wonderful stone, so I'll start to look at it and I'll try to explain to you what this is. While I would say maybe art, in a way, could try to do whatever, represent it, redo it, deconstruct it, in a way for you to think of it differently, or to, in the first place, give you a method to sense. And I don't know, I find there is a specific danger in pretending that you could just destroy the boundary, and then presenting science as art is no longer about knowledge or truth or explaining how things are, which is in a way connected also to that idea, which is a bit strange to me, but maybe just because I don't understand, to take a show from that KM that is called The Critical Zone, that is explaining a lot about the state we're in, and you bring it to different countries and you just show it instead of, for example, invite people to actually do their own version of the show, which I felt like Janavi would have been much more what you said, why show something instead of doing it. Yeah.
Can I say something to that quickly? Because I agree, first of all. I have to say a tiny defense, because I didn't say the full scope of it. So there were artists from India and Sri Lanka invited to the show. So it was very clear that you can't just bring it without altering it. And the show is not just a show. I think the events and it's called the activation program, that's how Critical Zones wants to call it, around us, is as much part of it as the exhibits. So there isn't even a clear distinction. And that is completely local. It's only with local initiatives, artists, scientists, and so on invited to it. I still agree that it's a very ambiguous idea, and it can get really difficult. But I think for me, because the idea was always to ask about the local and the global, and the global and the local, and that weird going back and forth, trying to go between these scales, which doesn't really work, of course, and all the impossibilities that are in there. I think the local activation program always tried to kind of bring that about a little bit, maybe just as a little, but I totally understand what you mean. But you asked a lot of other things too, and that I didn't respond to now.
Well, we have to keep time a little bit in check. I mean, and I think the question pertained to the artist method question, right? And that's why it's still relevant. Joanna, you have also a question?
Yes, plenty of questions on this side, your favorite.
Yeah, and then we have Björn, and who else? You.
Oh,
Hello.
That we don't have time. So you, Björn, and Maya, and then Sukanya, and then we have to be done. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Joanna Leśnierowska, and I wanted to thank you very much for the exchange of thoughts. My brain is steaming, and I'm feeling totally confused. And I wanted to say so badly something, but now I'm not so sure. But I know that I know, but I don't know how to express it, and it takes a lot about what I actually wanted to tap in. Because Mira just very quickly passed through, and we didn't stop on it because it's a very big topic about unknown. And you said that a lot of performing arts is actually beginning in the unknown. I'm coming from performance art, so of course I hook on it immediately. And then also a notion of practice, which is for performance artists and choreographers, especially dancers, really like very much connected to a very down-to-earth, also often daily routine of things, which might seem at the beginning in a total contradiction with unknown, associated also with maybe an ocean of potentiality and vastness of discoveries that come or be digged from the depth of what we don't know yet, and some super strict discipline, which is connecting us to scientists who are choosing their method and sticking to the rules. And then actually very interesting for me is that listening to what Monica you said about the practice being a vehicle for your art, actually, so you know art without the practice in a way. It's actually exactly the same, I think, understood in our field, that through the practice, getting to the moment in which it becomes even exhausted to the boredom, we are actually opening to the unknown and finding a freedom in the limitations, and actually with the brevity jumping it, insisting on this day-to-day routines to discover everything that is beyond, which actually taps into anti-disciplinarity, because while executing our practices, we are discovering so many different things. And then this is actually very interesting for me. Is science actually ready for the unknown? That's another question. And is science ready for the hidden knowledge, embodied knowledge that maybe is already not knowing that knows, and has a strong conviction that knows, but needs to be still brought into the space of visibility? And is actually science gallery ready for the hidden knowledge like intuition, serendipity, that actually is also a big part of the especially choreographic process and performance making process, and probably also many other artistic processes. I was very surprised to see the black box sphere put into a digital plate of your activities. So it's also a question, how do you understand black box sphere being in a digital?
Let's stick to two questions.
No, but that is actually still the one question about how science and scientists are actually dealing and ready for the
unknown,
with the unknown, understood also as a hidden knowledge, as embodied knowledge, as a knowledge that we all share also, that actually could be a vehicle. So it's actually asking about performance artists in the science, of course.
So, I mean, this is directed at you. Are you ready for the unknown and to unleash the hidden knowledge?
I'm ready for anything.
Good.
No, sir, I mean, just quickly, you know, historians of science, but also sociologists of science, anthropologists of science will tell you that tacit knowledge is integral to science. I mean, science, if not the unknown, there is, I don't know what science does. I mean, that's what it does. So I think on both sides, there needs to be sort of, you know, on both sides. I mean, my God, what's happened? There is room, I think, in opening up the processes of scientific practice to our witnessing, to see that there is room for things that we think are alien to that world. I mean, all of that, what you say, I think if you meet lab practitioners, or even if you go back to Bruno Latour's books, in fact, Science in Action, Laboratory Life, you'll find a lot of that, including mentions of things like informed intuition and things like that. And what's the place for it? So yeah, so yes.
Björn?
But why the black boxes in the digital?
You can ask that over lunch. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
So,
why are you doing that to my lunch?
Hi there, I'm Björn. Thanks a lot for also thinking out loud a little bit, and it really allowed me to formulate a question which I was maybe which was hidden for a while, and I want to share that with you. And as Latour seems to be on high currency, I start with a quote, which if anyone knows where it comes from, I'm still searching for it, I'm happy for it. He's supposed to have said that science is a park, research is jungle. And that for me is kind of a very helpful way to bring, especially art and science collaboration, I'm interested in methods, together around the idea that research itself, or recherche, sometimes artistic research, they can come together in this phase before it gets codified in different realms and so forth, because this is jungle. This is where the unknown is. This is maybe where the wonderment lies, and all sorts of navigational questions come up, and where different skills can come together. And I'm very interested in this as a method, so coming back to the topic here, art and science collaboration maybe as a even ontological method. And Humboldt, with his sense of wonderment, I find that both for the process of collaboration, but also for the outcome, one of the maybe main qualities that methods need to bring about or to instill. So how can we really cultivate not only wonderment, but in an age of ecological crisis, maybe a sense of the fragility and the existential threat that we are within and working on, and what are historical references that help us? So I've been working for a while, sometimes with the Goethean kind of zarte Empirie, the tender empiricism or delicate empiricism, to help artists and scientists kind of come together with this idea of we have an interest in phenomena, we can approach it differently, but with a certain quality of respect, of humbleness, of trying to approach it in a way that we bring out life, and that we can share beauty and the fragility of life at the same time, and not dissect it and take it apart, but something kind of holistic. But it's a very romantic, and sometimes Goethe is, it's also not my main reference. So I'm looking for references that help me convey to the people that I work with, maybe from different traditions, what this quality could be, but then also like very concrete questions. How do you cultivate within your collaborations a sense of wonderment, of awe, of respect for the beauty and the fragility of what we're working on?
You're on the podium, I don't say anything.
I mean, I think, it's there. You have to create the circumstances for its realization, right? Like you can't kind of create wonderment, right? It's there in people. I think it's in many ways there are barriers between the practice both of knowledge making and art making. And I think at least one way to create those conditions is to create a visibility into these practices. And I think therein might lie some trick. But I'm sure there's more, and there's more to be done. And just as a footnote, there are specificities to every location. What happens in France hopefully stays in France, but or in Switzerland or in Germany, there will always be specificities. But I think we might also want to begin to let down an expectation of difference. Specificities, yes, things are geographically and time and in all ways specific. But I think what happens when we call those specificities or categorize them as differences is that we start in a way from a place where, because difference has to be negotiated, and there are very latent and unarticulated assumptions of incommensurability, antagonisms, illegibility that are built into difference, which come in the way of actually doing things. And that's as true for communities of artistic practice and science as they are of looking at, India and Germany, for example. Why does a ZKM exhibition go to India? And why is it illegible in India? Why, if it's perfectly legible in India too. And of course, there will be specific things that can be discussed when it's placed there. And those specificities are very important because they inform our ability to do anything about it. And those are also our tools of making sense. But they're not illegible, they're not incommensurate, nor are they antagonistic. they don't necessarily work against each other.
So there's a reason why I'm brutally cutting this, because two wonderful artists have been cooking lunch for us. So please take your question with you to the lunch. We are very happy that VRIA, Awareness in Art, has agreed to collaborate with us on different levels. And this lunch with Betty Jones and Andrea Sommer was facilitated by Martina, who's also on the roundtable this afternoon. Maybe you quickly say how this works now. And the thing is this, you're all invited. So it's a nice thing, Amber.
Thank you, Damian. And thank you all for this interesting dialogue. And so I don't think we have time for a break now, Damian, I guess. So we go directly to the lunch. So we invite you to all go out over to the terrace outside here. So we will have, we are hosting a lunch talk together with Sonja Schenkel from the Climate Pavilion, with nutritionist and healer Betty Jones, and the artist Andrea Sommer, that prepared delicately and with lots of care the lunch for us. And the topic of the lunch talk is food and emotions. So please feel free to come over now outside, and we continue there.